Okay, I am going to go ahead and bring up my slides in a screen share. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Apologies for any little pauses on my side. I'll be having to admit people until Hank gets here to join me too. So we will be sending out our slides along with a recording of tonight's episode for you to have and to share and to go back and revisit. And as ever, reach out with any questions. This MTPW after my name just means that I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And never did I imagine that I'd be using my tech writing skills or my undergraduate degree in communication to be doing safety education around technology. But, well, here we are. So I got involved about a decade ago when a friend of mine at book group had tipped us off that she was reading a book called Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman. And my friend Wendy was an engineer, and she was starting to tell us that there were biological effects from today's wireless technology. And then not long after that, something else crossed my desk when I was the grant coordinator for our school district. And I had seen that the American Academy of Environmental Medicine had put a position statement out in 2012 asking our schools not to adopt wireless technology and to stay with hardwired tech. So I thought, wow, if there's anything to this, I would really like to know, because I ran our local education foundation for 8 years, and I personally brought a lot of wireless tech into our schools at the time when the industry was pushing in their 21st century classroom. So we got wireless infrastructure, we got Chromebooks and iPads and smart boards and minis, and what we thought was going to give our kids a leg up. Once I started doing the research into the science, which we'll walk you through tonight, it became very clear that this technology is not safe, and it was never biologically safety tested before it was allowed to come to market. And so it was not an easy conversation to have, but we helped my schools here in Ashland, Massachusetts become the first in the nation, unbeknownst to me at the time. But we were the first to put this little sign into our classrooms with best practices for mobile devices. Turn off the devices when not in use. Turn the Wi-Fi on only when it's needed. Don't leave it pulsating at our students and staff all day long. And as we'll see in a moment, the legal fine print tells us not to put these devices on our body. Use it on a solid surface, preferably not something that is metal, because metal amplifies radiation. So this was groundbreaking at the time, back in 2014. And then I went and I spoke to our legislators about this. And Senator Karen Spilka, who's now our Senate president here in Massachusetts, she's my senator. And when I met with her and I measured her cell phone and I measured her district director's laptop, both devices went off the charts with man-made radiation. And they're looking at me like, really? I said, yes, and nobody knows about this. And so she put me with an attorney in her office, and we crafted a very simple bill that would form a commission to bring the right minds together at the state level to look at wireless radiation and then decide what to do. And I have also helped with a law, the only real law that's been passed in the country, in New Hampshire, where they did an independent investigation, and we'll share with you their findings too. On this journey, I was contacted by a group in Europe that had also learned about wireless being harmful. And Dr. Deborah Davis introduced me to them. Now, Dr. Deborah Davis is a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on the climate change team. And for the last decade, she and her team have also been all over the wireless radiation issue. She knew of the work that I had done with the schools and the legislature and introduced me to these folks in Europe. And we spent some time developing this little nonprofit, where we've created a course that you can complete in about a half an hour online. So we now have off-the-shelf training for a school district, for a municipality, for a company, or for friends and family. We can train large groups of people now in about a half an hour online. And then when Dr. Davis brought a panel of experts to the Massachusetts State House, I was 2 years into my journey at that point, and I really had nobody I could speak to. I was kind of self-taught, reading the research and taking action. And then this panel of world-leading experts came to our State House to ask for right-to-know legislation. We had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, coming in and saying that he's met with a dozen of the world's leading scientists, and our guidelines put out by the Federal Communications Commission do not protect us. Canada's Safety Code 6 standards do not protect them. And I was sitting there going, whoa, there's a captain of industry here telling us this is not safe. And we had other experts, one of the scientists from India flew in and he joined this panel. We had Dr. Catherine Steiner Adair, who is a child psychologist, and she teaches all over the world and says, because we're losing our kids in the shallows of screens, they should be outside playing in nature, hiding out under the rhododendron, going into deeper and deeper levels of imaginative play. That's what helps to build a healthy child, the movement, the touch with nature, meaningful contact with others, not the shallows of a screen. So this was a top-notch panel that came to Massachusetts. And, after being on my own for 2 years, it was so gratifying to be at our State House with people from all over the Commonwealth of Massachusetts who knew what this toxin is. And so from there, I started connecting with these other people. And eventually I formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And if you go out to my website, you will find the science, you'll find other resources, you will find what's happening at the state level, and you'll find local news that mainstream media often won't cover. Sometimes the local outlets will cover. So when we bring this conversation up with our leaders, many people will say, oh, gee, tinfoil hat, tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. And that indeed is what we've been all trained to think by industry, tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. And we'll teach you how to bring that conversation front and center. So we're very grateful that now we have a lot of people who join us every month for our monthly meetings. And then somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked me to co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference. Now, this included doctors, scientists, government agencies, green certifying agencies like LEEDs, and sorry, I'm letting some folks in here. And so it was the first time that many, hospitals, urban planners are hearing about wireless radiation for the first time. And we had an outstanding panel here. We had Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada. We had Dr. Martin Paul, who's one of the leading scientists on this, teaching us the mechanisms of harm, because for years the industry spun it, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified. Let's keep doing what we're doing. Well, now we know many different mechanisms of harm, and we'll walk you through that too when we start looking at the science. So two others who are on this panel included Theodora Scarrato, who's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, and she came to talk to us about what other countries are already doing to protect their children and their citizens and their environment. We here in the US have so much of the industry here that they've kind of blocked any meaningful action in our country. And then Peter Sullivan joined this panel, and I had found Peter's work through a lecture that he gave online. And Peter, in his younger years, had been a fighter pilot for our government, kind of like Top Gun. And then when he left that, he then went and became an engineer in Silicon Valley. And He knew a lot of heavy hitters, like his friends were the ones who invented cell phones. So Peter had been heavily into technology. And when he was a fighter pilot, he was way up high with the Earth's natural high electromagnetic fields inside of a plane that had radar on the outside. And this is where all this technology came from, was our militaries. It grew out of the radar systems that are used for military weapons. And then poor Peter was sitting in the cockpit with all the other wireless transmissions that allowed him to communicate back with the base stations at home. So Peter got really, really sick over time. And then when both of his sons came up through the preschool years, they were both placed on the autism spectrum. And Peter did what a lot of people will do, and that is, for somebody with autism, clean out the diet, go to organics. He went so far as to detox the heavy metals. And then what he will tell people today is that as a first line of defense, do the digital detox. And what that means is at least 12 hours a night, create a sleep sanctuary where you have no radio frequency radiation in your living environment, especially at night, so the body can do proper cell repair and regeneration. So the reason why I like to include these talks from the National Institutes of Health is, one, they're highly credible, and two, they're short. We all had individually less than 10 minutes each to present. So if you want something that's highly credible and quick and easy to digest to open this conversation with others, that's a really good link. And then one of the major gaps we had when I fell down the rabbit hole is we could see that so many people were developing these sicknesses. Some people will call it microwave sickness because that's what the military used to call it. Some people will call it radio frequency illnesses. Others will call it electromagnetic field exposure illnesses. So lots of different little acronyms, but the bottom line is it all comes from man-made energy. Electromagnetic fields, radio frequency radiation, microwave radiation, and it's all being transmitted from every single one of our wireless devices, routers, cell towers, small cells, smart meters, and we'll teach you a bit more about each of those today too. So we have now had two major EMF, or electromagnetic field, medical conferences. And this most recent one kicked off in 2021, which was right when we got into the pandemic. So we had to pivot and learn how to bring that conference online. And it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because now we have individual recordings of every lecture, every Q&A session, and every panel with the experts throughout that entire conference. And it's now been put online by the conference executive director, Elizabeth Kelly, at no charge. There were 24.5 continuing medical education credits and CEs for nurses, but that accreditation period expired in July. But now anybody in the world, from citizens to healthcare practitioners to first responders, can go get professionally trained on their own time. These lectures were anywhere from 20 minutes to a half an hour to an hour. You can just slot them into your calendar and watch and learn from world-leading experts at no charge. Okay, so that's how I got involved in all of this. And if folks have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat and we'll take a look at that before the night is through. Our program is a 2-hour program, and we are, as I mentioned earlier, recording this, and we are also going to send you the recording probably tomorrow, along with all of these slides to help you to go in and do the deep dive on what interests you most. So how did our schools become the first in the nation to even have this little sign with precautions? I think it was when they read the legal fine print. So for anybody who's with us, if you have an iPhone, I invite you to take that out right now, and I'm going to walk you through how you can get to the legal fine print. And for anybody who doesn't have an iPhone, you can find this in any other make or model just by searching on your phone, make and model, and then just type in RF exposure for radio frequency radiation. So you can also go out to this link here to the website called Show Us the Fine Print, and you'll see different kinds of devices and these warnings that have been in there all along. For example, on the iPads, they had a disclaimer in there that's saying, this can cause seizures, blackouts, eye strain. And I know of children in neighboring schools who had their first seizures while using these tablets. So it's happening right under our noses. So from the iPhone, go into settings, a little ways down, hit general. From general, go all the way down to the bottom and hit legal and regulatory. And then on the next screen, about 4 down, you'll see it's RF exposure. Again, radio frequency, microwave radiation that they politely call energy because it is a man-made energy. And when we read that legal fine print, it tells us a couple of really important things. One, they tested this device at a distance from the body. So if you're tucking it in your bra or your shirt or your suit pockets, or you're putting it in your waistband, or you're putting it in your back pocket, while it's radiating, you are exceeding the government limits for public radiation exposure. And unfortunately, they didn't even biologically safety test this before it came to market. So the FCC allows, this really high level of microwave radiation, and the science that we're going to look at shows biological effects at hundreds of thousands of times below where the industry is still allowed to pulsate us with microwave radiation. So that's the first thing in the fine print. And you should know that the FCC has now been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm. And we'll talk more about that when we discuss legal actions. So that's the first thing in there. If you go down another paragraph or two, it'll say to reduce your exposure, basically, once you know, don't touch something that's radiating. They suggest you use a hands-free option like the speakerphone or a headset. I'm going to stop my screen share for just a moment and show you a couple of things. So, as maddening as it is to learn about this issue because we all fell for it, please know there are solutions at every turn. And that's really what we hope to inspire today, is that you might find the courage to start taking baby steps, at least, towards safe technology. So when you read that fine print, it'll say, use the headset that came with your phone. Well, if it's just a regular wired headset that you're plugging into a radiating device and then plugging the other end up into your brain, remember, microwave radiation amplifies around metal. So you're plugging that in and the radiation shooting up the wire going, woohoo, party on up to the brain. Same thing with those earbuds, a really dangerous proposition. Not only are they causing hearing damage and bacterial infections, but they are also putting a two-way microwave radiation transmitter on both sides of your brain and then sending signal down to wherever your mobile device is. So please don't do either of those options anymore. Instead, look for something called a hollow tube headset or an air tube headset. And this is sort of what they look like. Notice it's just got rubber tips that you hook into your ears. No metal, because you don't want to draw that ambient radiation off to your brain. It's got 2 little ferrite beads that break the radiation coming up the wire. And then it's got a little volume and muting control on here. So you can have what you need. It's got a nice long cord so you can put the radiating device as far away from you as you can. And if you're only using it to listen to music or any other entertainment you've downloaded, please download whatever you want to listen to and then put that device right into airplane mode and make sure all those antennas are turned off. And then you can enjoy your technology without radiating yourself. So one of my big puzzlements when I fell down this rabbit hole was, this is invisible. How do we even know we're being radiated? And then I learned there are radio frequency radiation detection meters. And the one that I have with me today is the one that was recommended at the EMF medical conference. And doctors are now putting this into their practice. There's one up here on the North Shore of Massachusetts who lets her patients borrow it for $10 and says you've got 2 hours. Go home, do your scavenger hunt, jot down the readings that you get and what it's coming from, and then come on back and we'll teach you how to use your technology safely. So in the scientific literature, they want us to be in the middle number here. It's called max, and I know you won't be able to see it very well from the camera, so I'll just tell you what it's doing. Right now, the maximum exposure in my home, see how it's nice and green? I'm at 2, and the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. In the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less in our indoor spaces. So especially in our sleeping areas. 2, I want to give you a demonstration now of what happens when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode and I turn on those multiple antennas, right? I'm not even doing anything. This is just those antennas coming online. And that's about enough of that. I'm going to put it back in airplane mode and you'll see it dissipates after a few seconds. Okay, so we were at 2. We want to be less than 10. Turning on my cell phone, we went to 3,180,000 microwatts per square meter. It may have even been higher, but that tops this meter out at 3,180,000. So that is capable of doing a lot of biological harm. So I'm going to go ahead and resume my screen share. And so when I was learning about this, my brain goes right towards solutions. If we can measure this, then we know what the gap is, and then we can fix it. So I went after a grant in my town and helped my Ashland Public Library become the first in the nation to put one of these radiation detection meters on loan in our public library. And again, that wasn't easy either. It took me 3 tries, 3 grant cycles. I had to educate every member of our select board, which is like our city council. And then I wanted 2 meters, one for the library so the whole community can borrow it, and one for the schools so we can get in there and protect the kids. Well, they were still kind of iffy by the 3rd round, but they said, well, we'll give you $400 conditionally for one, if the library agrees to take it into circulation. And so I had to go present to the library trustees, and they voted 4-1 to bring this into circulation. And now this has become a national pilot, and people all over the country are just going to their libraries and saying, hey, other libraries are putting this on loan and into circulation. And today the ask isn't even very far-fetched, because libraries are having to reinvent themselves because not everybody reads a physical book anymore. So most libraries today are now sporting a library of things where you can just go borrow stuff from your library. Like mine has a metal detector, they've got projectors, they've got a Wi-Fi hotspot. My daughter's on the wait list still for a power washer from her library. So asking them to put one of these on loan, knowing that others are also doing that, is a really great thing that you could do this week to get the conversation going in your town. The Environmental Health Trust has a small grant fund, and if your library cannot afford the $400 in their budget, and we do encourage you to get a meter in this range. A couple of libraries here have something called the GQ 390, which is probably around the $100 range. And we compared the two, and that meter is okay, but it does not pick up to the sensitivity level that these other certified meters do. So if you can get $400, do that. Some people will buy them for themselves because they can afford to do so. Others will go in with neighbors or friends or family and share it amongst themselves. But if your library can't afford it, or maybe they can only afford partial payment toward this, have them, it has to be a librarian, reach out to the Environmental Health Trust, and they may be able to help you get one for your library. They just helped Sunderland, Massachusetts get one recently. And then most of mainstream media today is now owned by 4 to 6 conglomerations that own a lot of these big companies like the wireless industry. So we simply do not get a balance of information through mainstream media anymore. We get the corporate messaging. And so our local cable stations are one of the last bastions of independent reporting left. They love when citizens say, hey, I have an idea for a program. So if you would like to ask me to co-host a program with you, I would be more than honored to do that. My cable station has been so kind over the years, and they sent a technician with camera equipment to my home, and we did this 23-minute public service announcement where we did a walkthrough of my home and showed with this acoustimeter. That was the one I got in 2016. I would recommend the Safe and Sound Pro 2 today because it's got some added features. But we do a walkthrough of my home that shows where all these common exposures and hidden antennas are, and then make suggestions for how to remediate. And then I was brought in a couple times to do a couple of episodes out in Worcester, Massachusetts at their cable station. And last year, the cable station manager said, Cece, we think you should just have your own show now. So twice a month, I go down to Worcester and we record half-hour episodes. We're up to number 36 right now. So if you want to listen to other citizens who have been injured, you want to listen to some of the doctors and scientists and building biologists, there's some really great insights and a lot of activists who are moving the needle towards safe technology in their communities. So please use the resources that we are making available to make your life easier on this journey. But we always say, don't take our word for it. Please do your own independent investigation and really look at the science, because you will hear a lot of disinformation from the industry. But once you start reading the science, it's irrefutable. Child and adult cancers. So for 20 years, our own government, the National Technology, the NTP, the National Toxicology Program, is part of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences at the National Institutes of Health. A lot of acronyms there, but the NTP is arguably the gold standard on toxin research in the world. This is the largest study they've ever completed, $30 million over the span of 2 decades. And at the end of the day, after an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage and more. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they can assign. Well, the industry will get a hold of a good study and go, oh, that's just one study. You need to have more research. And well, right on the heels of our cell phone study, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large multi-million-dollar study on cell tower base stations. And guess what? They found the same thing. And it's not a surprise because back in 2011, the World Health Organization classified these radio frequency emissions of electromagnetic fields as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. That is in the same category as lead, thalidomide, DDT, chloroform, and all these other harmful exposures. What was missing in 2011 were these rodent studies that have now been completed and show it is indeed a carcinogen. So we don't need more science. We need to get busy and start protecting ourselves. DNA damage, as we know, that's the roadmap to grow a proper baby, plant, pollinator, tree, any kind of biological biome. When I started reading the infertility studies, I found that they've taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA, slowed the motility of the sperm, and caused far fewer sperm to be viable, or what they call apoptosis or programmed cell death, in just 4 hours of exposure to the radiating antennas in a laptop. And I thought, oh, good Lord, what have we done? We had just sent our oldest daughter off to college with her MacBook, which of course she was using right on top of her reproductive organs. My youngest daughter had just gone into high school and we thought we'd give her a leg up. So for Christmas, we bought her a laptop, which she was using on top of her reproductive organs. And these infertility studies have been repeated time and again. The science is solid. We have additional studies on women's fertility. There's a great study out of Kaiser Permanente that showed women using wireless tech are having higher miscarriage rates, and it just goes on and on. Neurotoxicity. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Dr. Hugh Taylor, who heads up the OB/GYN department at Yale Medical, has done the rodent studies, and it's unethical to do studies on humans, but he's done the rodent studies, and after exposing the pregnant mice to this radiofrequency radiation, those pups were born and began bouncing off the walls of the cages, much like a child with attention issues. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. She is now retired as a pediatric Harvard neurologist, and she sees huge connections between what we know scientifically when we expose the brain to microwaves and what she was seeing in the families in her care. Alzheimer's, Dr. Martin Pall culled the science and showed that where Alzheimer's used to hit in our 90s and 80s and maybe 70s, we're now seeing it in our 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and even in some cases in our 20s. So we cannot continue to radiate the brain and expect that things are going to behave normally. Because the wireless industry has such a lock on mainstream media, we are very grateful when more mainstream groups start reporting out on this, like the Environmental Working Group. So some of you may recognize their work with pesticides, and every year they put out 2 fact sheets. One is called the Clean 15 and the other is called the Dirty Dozen, with guidance on what you should really try and get organically grown and what you can probably get away with grown conventionally. So I was aware as a mom of their work, and we're so grateful that they now have funding and a PhD on staff who's working on the wireless radiation issue. So they have put out some great fact sheets like this one, Protecting Kids from Wireless Radiation in School and at Home. They've got another one here on the neurotoxicity with the nervous system. So know your audience. If you're going to open up a conversation with somebody, mind you, the industry has convinced everybody, as soon as you open your mouth and go, oh, I think there's something wrong with wireless, everybody's conditioned to go tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. But I will tell you, when you bring it into their own phone and you show them the legal fine print, it's no longer out there, it's right there in their hands. And then that's the first step. The second tip is to get a meter, because with 5G and the Internet of Things, the industry's forecasting that everyone will have 200 radiating devices in their home for 5G and the Internet of Things. So, you know, who knew that a phone had at least a half a dozen antennas in it? My printer had 3 antennas in it. I didn't know. I had to use a meter to find out where all 3 of them were and turn them off. So that's critical. So we're grateful for the Environmental Working Group. And then we have to know that children are especially vulnerable to any environmental toxins. And here's what Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues have learned through modeling. These head models are turned on their side, literally turned on their ear. So when you put a cell phone up to a fully formed adult skull, that microwave radiation is pulsating into your brain about 1/3 of the way. On a 10-year-old child, it's about 2/3 of the way into that brain. And on a 5-year-old child whose skull is much thinner than yours and mine and whose brain has a higher water content, that microwave radiation is radiating almost the entire surface of that child's brain. So we can't sit and wait for somebody else to fix this. There is no cavalry coming. We have so many resources we're going to share with you to help you open this conversation credibly and encourage you to stay with it, because nobody's coming to fix this for you in the short term. Okay, so we just discussed the long-term effects, and now we're going to talk a bit about short-term effects that many people are experiencing today and have never been taught to connect the dots to their wireless technology emissions. So please know that the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Jobs, JAN, the Jobs Accommodation Network, they already have recommendations for accommodating people with electromagnetic sensitivities. They've had it there for almost 20 years. So that brings credibility to the conversation. So time and again, after we do one of these educational webinars, people will come back to me and say, Cece, I didn't want to know this. I didn't want to hear it. I live off of my devices. And again, our message is not no technology. It's safe technology and we know how to do it. But they'll come back and they'll say, well, I recognized a bunch of this. So I did what you suggested and created a sleep sanctuary. And oh my gosh, I slept through the night for the first time in ages. And for many years, the industry would spin it that, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified in the scientific literature, so let's keep doing what we're doing. Well, the science has advanced, and now we know of many mechanisms of harm. With the insomnia, we being light beings, meaning we operate off of the light and dark cycle with our circadian rhythm, in the wee hours of darkness during our sleep, the brain releases melatonin that goes in and regulates our sleep and helps to do the cleanup of the debris from the day. But what happens is our brains cannot differentiate between this man-made light energy form and natural daylight. So the brain's over there going, do, when's it going to get dark? And if we leave this invisible light exposure on all night, the brain can't do its job and give us the melatonin that we need. So that's one important mechanism of harm. And then stabbing, searing, headaches, migraines, nosebleeds or ear bleeds, chronic fatigue, pain from unidentified sources. Another mechanism of harm that we now have well documented today through the good works of Dr. DeHaas and others is something called rouleau formation. And in my little brain, that sounds a lot like Rolos, you know, those caramel chocolate candies that stack up. Well, that's not too far off from what happens if you look under a microscope at red blood cells in a healthy environment. They are free-floating, nicely formed blood cells that go and bring oxygen to all of our systems and organs. Oxygen is critically important. After you expose the red blood cells to microwave radiation and you look again under the microscope, those nice smooth cells are now looking like bottle caps. And because they're exposed to an electromagnetic field, they start magnetizing and glomming together and forming this chain of red blood cells that now can't get to where it needs to go because it's not free floating anymore to bring oxygen. So oxidative stress is a really big problem, and by and large, the precursor to many or most chronic illnesses. And then we have skin abnormalities. How many people talk about the hot ear when talking on the phone? Heating, flushing, tingling, rashes, nerve, excitement. We now know that our skin has little antennas in the surface that help us to navigate through our world. They will tell us, hey, it's too hot or it's too cold. You better go do something about that. When we bombard our skin with microwave radiation, we have a lot of fallout there too. And it's important to know when the industry talks about 5G, they say, oh, it doesn't really penetrate any deeper than the eyes or the skin. Well, the skin feeds into every other organ in our system. And I'm sorry, but I kind of like the visual effects I get with my eyes. So we really need to be careful. And then we are biologically electrical and chemical beings, and our cells whisper to one another all day and night, sending electrical signaling to keep us humming along. When we overpower ourselves with this man-made influx of energy, it does something to many people's hearts. It can cause an arrhythmia, it can cause AFib, it can cause tachycardia, it can cause blood pressure to go too high or too low, depending on your own body's individual proclivities. And then cognitive impairment and anger and behavior issues, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. We were at epidemic levels of anxiety and depression even before the pandemic, after we'd started radiating ourselves for a couple of decades here. And at the EMF medical conference, it was just heart-wrenching to hear them warning us that if we don't get ahead of this, we can expect many more of these societal outbursts like we've been seeing with the mass shootings. And I don't know about where you are, but here in Boston, after the kids went back to school from the pandemic, on 3 different days, I saw broadcasts on the news of 3 different school districts reporting that the kids were literally beating on each other with their Chromebooks. And what did we do? We sent every child home for the pandemic with a school-issued tablet with not one shred of safety training. And many children were given much more access to screens while their parents were trying to work from home. So we've really gotten ourselves into some hot water, but we know how to fix it. So again, the science is very clear. Here's a really good paper on the neuropsychiatric effects, including depression. So sadly, it's not just you and I, it's every biological cell on the planet, and we have wonderful resources for you. Our friends at the Environmental Health Trust just recently launched this website, Wildlife, Wireless, and the Environment. You'll find the harm, you'll find the science. But please know that our poor little pollinators, man, they are just getting walloped in this electropollution. They have navigation systems in their beaks and in their brains that are meant to be synchronized with the Earth's natural electromagnetic field. Now, the Earth pulses this beautiful healing energy 7.83 times a second. And it was a scientist named Schumann who figured that out. So it's called Schumann's resonance. And the scientific term is 7.83 hertz. So that's how many cycles per second, 7 to 8 times a second. Well, when we got so fancy with digital technology and we started pulsing in the megahertz range, that's 1 million times per second per megahertz. In the gigahertz range, it's 1 billion times per second. We're getting hit with this spiked erratic pulse of microwave radiation. And our poor pollinators, they just don't stand a chance. And the bees, the birds, you know, we're disrupting their own natural navigation system if we're not outright frying them. We have species disappearing by the dozens right now. When they launched 5G in the Netherlands, in The Hague, they tested it and birds literally started dropping from the sky. So we can't just follow along with what industry is pushing on us. We've really got to get smart about this. And as far as energy consumption goes, there was a Greenpeace analyst as far back as 2012, who at that point in time said, if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And look how much more we have adopted layer upon layer in the last 12 years. Horrific things happening. Who knew? But there are dozens of minerals that go into every one of our devices that are gotten through horrific procedures down in the Congo and elsewhere where humans are not being treated humanely. Data warehouses, networks, personal devices, streaming, send and receive, charging and recharging and recharging. All the apps that we've been seduced into putting on our phone just because they're fun or cool or even helpful, but we probably don't really use all the time. They're back there doing updates and using energy all the time. Streaming consumes huge amounts of energy. So again, download information, entertainment onto your device, then put it in complete airplane mode with all those antennas turned off. And then it's safe to use. Although looking at a screen close range is never going to be good for our eyes. We now have an epidemic of myopia, which is changing the shape of the eyeball because we're meant to be scanning to infinity and beyond for predators. And now we spend hour upon hour in the shallows of a short screen, and it's damaging our eyes. So we need to learn to use this with care, and we're going to teach you how to do that. So one of the big questions I had as I'm reading all this science is, if little me can find the science and really figure out that it's extraordinarily harmful, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. And then in 2015, Harvard's Law School Center for Ethics came out with this captured agency report, how the FCC is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. Notice the graphic they chose, and this report is free and online for you to read for yourself. But we're basically now a revolving door with our federal agencies and the industry. They are in there making the laws to protect their profits and not our public health and safety. ProPublica did a good article, and sadly, these conflicts go all the way up to the World Health Organization. So just a word on the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. The gentleman who's in charge of radiation control today is Dr. Jeffrey Shorin. He wasn't around when this $30 million study was commissioned. Those scientists are long since passed away or retired. Today we have Dr. Jeffrey Shorin. And when the FCC was sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm, well, Dr. Shorin knew that they found cancers and DNA damage, and he went right over to his buddies at the FCC and said, we don't believe that study, let's keep doing what we're doing. Well, one might ask what would possess him to do that, and if you just look a little deeper, you'll find that he is married to a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry. So these conflicts of interest are everywhere. The World Health Organization, it turns out, has two groups that focus on radio frequency radiation, electromagnetic fields, and one of them has been the scientists who are highly qualified to assess the level of danger. And then there's this other group that is funded, self-appointed, funded by industry. And the WHO has now reopened their investigation because we do have the science to show the harm, but it looks like the industry group has gotten their hooks into this too. So again, conflicts of interest up and down the chain, and nobody's coming to rescue you, your children, or your community, except for you. That's where our democracy kicks in. So that's all the bad news. So let's look at solutions. The first thing we want to do is start reducing the exposures that you and I have direct control over. So in your home or your office or your schools, you look at the routers or the wireless access points, and they all have these Ethernet ports in it. So all we have to do is get our Ethernet cables back, plug it in, and most have more than one device now. So you can just get these little switch boxes. You know, this little 5-port one, it's tiny, right? And you just plug in for the electrical, and then you just plug an Ethernet cable in that goes to your router. And then for each one of your devices, get a little adapter if it doesn't plug directly into an Ethernet cable. Get a little adapter for 20 or 30 bucks and plug it all in. So plugging stuff back in is the first step to hardwiring. And then the second step is you have to go into the settings and turn off all those antennas. And remember, we said they're tricky. They're putting multiple antennas, and if you don't know that they're in there, how would you ever know? And you're walking around thinking you're safe when you still might be getting radiated. So it's critically important to get a hold of a meter and measure. Now, one thing you can do when you're not on the go, because remember, this is only supposed to be mobile technology, is in your settings on your phone, there's a call forwarding option. And you can just forward your cell phones to a landline. And we know a lot of people got talked out of their landline. But really, I just called Verizon recently, and it's only like 20 bucks to hook that back up. So it's a choice, but you should at least know that that will get you to safe technology in your home. Okay. So control the things that you can control, but there are some other exposures that you may or may not have control over. One of these is the utility smart meters. And those are the devices that are put on our homes to measure our consumption of gas, water, electric, solar, propane, whatever your energies are. And these that have an FCC ID number on them are pulsating microwave radiation. And the industry will say, oh, it's just a couple seconds a day. Well, when I was preparing to testify before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, I wanted to see what was happening. So I sat there in my dining room where they're mounted on the outside of my wall, and it pulsated 17,000 times a day. at my loved ones. And thank goodness we don't have anybody who sleeps on that part of the house right now. But remember, radiation likes metal. It can hop on the wires and the pipes of your house if it's not done correctly. We've seen too many fires and explosions from improper grounding or power surges. And for those who care about data, anything that's being buckshot out through the air can be hacked. And they are, in many cases, harvesting your data and selling it for profit. At the EMF Medical Conference, this is another area where they said, when these smart meters go in, we see sudden onset of microwave sicknesses. This is a big environmental justice issue. Here in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is an environmental justice, underprivileged, economically suppressed area where people are working 2 or 3 jobs just to get, a roof over their head and food on the table. These industries come in with their toxic products and say, hey, look, we rolled it out here and it was so successful. Now we're going to roll it out all across the state. And hey, New York, hey, Rhode Island, hey, Connecticut, you're behind the times. Look how great Massachusetts was with our smart grid pilot program. So these are the tactics that industry uses, but they are making people very sick. They consume a ton of energy and they're bad for so many reasons. Jeremy Johnson out in Silicon Valley is an engineer married to a medical doctor. They both got really sick very suddenly, and nothing in her training could help them sort it out. It turned out a bank of smart meters went in on their condo. So he gives a really good TED Talk. And, our engineers and physicists and technologists have all been taught you have to have heat from a device to have harm. And they know nothing about the biological effects at the non-thermal, non-ionizing, low-level microwave radiation pulsation. So it's always helpful to give them some information from somebody who's in their own field. So Jeremy's TED Talk is really good. And then Dr. Alexia McKnight did one as well. And she is a large animal veterinarian. So she's a radiologist and she works with the ionizing radiation for her profession. And she knows everybody uses shielding and they're very careful. Well, she didn't know about these smart meters or non-ionizing radiation until one of these meters went on her home. She became so neurotoxic that she was out in traffic with her daughter in the car and could not remember, does that green light mean stop or go? And thank goodness she made the right choice and got them home safely, but that's how damaging this can be. So hers is another really good TED Talk. So we talked about our devices, we talked about smart meters. Now let's look at the cell towers, and they began out in industrial parks, 300 feet up in the air, very far away from where we lived or worked or went to school or worshiped or recreated. And then the industry started spinning up so many more products that they needed more capacity. So they started encroaching and bringing them closer and closer. They started putting them in neighborhoods. They started mounting them on buildings. And so it's critically important to examine the non-industry funded science. And what we see when we look at the epidemiological studies, and I didn't know what that word was, but it means what's actually happening out in our world. They have taken measurements and they have looked at the distance and they have assessed health effects. So within 500 meters or 1,640 feet of a cell tower, there are statistically significant increases in neurotoxicity and death rates and more. That death curve starts coming down at 500 meters or 1,640 feet. It doesn't actually catch up to normal population statistics till almost double that. So 500 meters is already a compromise. So it's critically important to look at the real science on this, not the industry stuff. And anybody here in the US can go to antennasearch.com and punch in an address, and it will give you a 3-mile radius and show you how many cell towers and how many of these big antennas are mounted near you. And remember, these antennas throw signal for miles, 20, 30 miles in many cases. So here, when I run it in my town, I live outside of Boston, And there's just shy, I think, of like 200 of these antennas. When I put the address in for Boston State House, all of our downtowns have become such a densification of electrosmog. Here in Boston, more than 4,500 of these massive antennas that are pulsating for miles, structured on more than 1,500 cell towers. So this is just one of the Boston neighborhoods, and you can see how densified all of this toxic technology is at close range to people's homes. And then with 5G, small cell antennas. So what was left to monetize on something called the electromagnetic spectrum are these tiny little millimeter waves. And right now, the way that you can get a signal inside the building, it's with these longer third and fourth generation or 3G and 4G waves. These long waves can get through objects and get in here to connect with your device. But these dinky little millimeter waves, they're spinning up as, oh, you can have smart cities and super highways and really fast streaming services. But those little millimeter waves are easily disrupted by rain, by snow, by trees, and anything else in the path between the antenna and your device. So our friends at Safe Tech Hawaii did a really nice little 5 or 6 minute video here if you want to check that out. And note that as they keep pushing all these fast entertainment downloads at us, they are buying up the entertainment industry. So it's a new revenue stream for them. So it's good money for them, bad idea for us. So it's not replacing the current technology, it's adding another layer of radiation to it. And in order for those little millimeter waves to fly, they can't go very far. So their solution is to put a cell tower every 2 to 12 houses at bedroom height inside our neighborhoods in our public access way. That is what 5G is. And here at a time where we're in a climate crisis and we're trying to find ways to cool our cities in the hot summer months, they're trying to grow the tree canopy to cool naturally. And here comes the industry clear-cutting trees so they can get their signals through from their toxic cell towers. Congressman Senator Richard Blumenthal in Connecticut was at a commerce hearing in DC when 5G was coming on the scene. And he said to these two leaders from industry, so please share with us, how much money have you invested in independent scientific research before bringing this to market? And the two guys kind of went, hamana, hamana, hamana. And then they were meant to say, we don't actually know of any independent studies that have been done. So Senator Blumenthal said, so as far as health and safety are concerned, we're flying blind here. And that's what they do. Shove it out there, ask questions later. And then Computer World and others have been reporting that 5G is a bad joke. It doesn't even deliver anything better than what we already have with 4G in most cases. Okay. So those are the primary sources. We now have all these satellites coming down at us too. And Dr. Magda Habas, who was co-chair of the EMF Medical Conference, recognizes that we now have not been monitoring this, the cumulative effects of what we're doing. So all of these dots on here are part of her BRAG project. She's asking citizens to be citizen scientists. And she has protocols for us to put a little sheet on our clipboard and go out and start taking real measurements where we live. And she calls it her BRAG project. Can you brag about the radiation levels in your community? B stands for blackout, where it's over 100,000 microwatts. R is for red, 10 to 100,000. A is for amber, 1,000 to 10,000. And G is for green, less than 1,000. So we said in our indoor environments, we want to be at 10 microwatts per square meter or less. Outdoors, they figure if you're not spending time directly under a radiating antenna, even if we could get back down to 1,000 or less, if you could clean up at night, that would probably be okay to keep us connected and reduce the risks. So that's the BRAG project. And anybody who's interested in purchasing the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter, because we all have to do the science with the same instrument, if you reach out to globalemf.net, which is listed here, and again, we're going to send you our slides to everybody who registered and the video. If you say that you would like to be a citizen scientist and help with this project, they can offer you a discount on the Safe and Sound Pro 2. I think for me, it was like a 20 or 25% discount, and on $400, that was really a nice savings. So please reach out if you want to help. But let's take a reality check here. We want to be at 1,000 or less outside. Up at the Westmoreland, New Hampshire Fire Department, the measurement was in the green. In Keene, it was inching up in the yellow. And now since that measurement was taken, they have activated 5G small cells. So we're pretty sure they're in the red or blackout zone. All these other towns are already at these very toxic levels. And here in Boston, for those of you who have been lucky enough to come down to our North End, that's where all these incredible Italian restaurants and bakeries are. But you'll see above the storefronts, we have people living in condos and apartments. Now, the main strip is Hanover Street, and the industry came in and put up these beautiful wrought iron lampposts, but these are actually cell tower antennas in here. And then when you go down to the cross streets and look down, they put these ugly gray monopoles right outside people's bedroom windows. So this is the reality of where we are today in most of our major cities. So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us, when we have important changes in society, it comes through 3 channels. First, the public engages, becomes informed, and then decides that we need to do something about this. And that's what we're hoping to inspire with our education. The courts rule, and then ultimately public policy catches up and gets enacted. My co-host Hank, I think, has joined us. So I'm just going to take a moment and assign him to be a co-host. Let me see if I can find Hank. And once I do, then he can help us to monitor the chat if you guys have questions out there. So I am going to make you a co-host. Welcome, Hank. I apologize if we got something mixed up with the time zone changes.
My fault. I apologize to you. I am so sorry. I'll explain it to you later.
Okay, but listen, while we're taking a break from the slides, and folks, we're going to go in and look at solutions next. That's really what is most important. So Frank, or Hank, why don't you go ahead and just in a couple of minutes, tell us how you got involved in this issue and where you stand today.
Sure. Thank you for having me on your show. And again, sorry I'm an hour late. It's horrible. So the way I got involved with the RF radiation and tracking that is I used to live in California about 10 years ago. And 7 years ago, I lived in California, but about 10 years ago, I got really sick and started noticing I was getting heart palpitations when I was passing cell towers. I lived in a house that had toxic mold, and something between the mold and the RF radiation from Wi-Fi and cell towers, it didn't mix, and it made me really, really sick. So after years of meeting with doctors, alternative doctors, and finding out that I couldn't be around RF radiation from cell towers, was able to easily turn off my own Wi-Fi router in my house and get rid of all the smart devices that put out RF signals. But I couldn't control the cell towers that the wireless industry was putting up. So I moved up to rural Idaho and found a nice little family farm where I could escape the radiation from my neighbors and also from the wireless industry. And after we found a house and we were successfully in a little ranch that was 2 miles from the nearest cell tower. I was here for about a year, and I got a notice that Verizon wanted to install a macro cell tower 600 yards behind my house in a neighbor's yard. And after jumping in with and creating a community group, Idahoans for Safe Technology, we actually convinced our county commissioners to deny this cell tower application. and ended up losing in court. A federal judge overturned our county commissioner's decision to not put the cell tower in, and learned a whole lot. And the cell tower went in, and it was turned on shortly after 9/11. And within about a week of the cell tower going on, I went into AFib up in the second story of my house, and I was hospitalized and cardioverted to get me back to a normal sinus rhythm. And over a year after that, I was hospitalized over a dozen times in AFib. Finally had to have a cardioversion, not a cardioversion, excuse me, an ablation surgery to solder my heart so that the RF radiation doesn't throw me into to AFib. It's been a long journey, but in going through all of that, I have gathered a strong group of friends, and I almost call them family here, that have all assembled as Idahoans for Safe Technology. And we set out to educate our county commissioners and our local city council members on the dangers to RF radiation, and showing them how we can say no, and what the Telecommunications Act actually gives local governments control over this. So until the wireless industry changes, I guess, federal law, and also implementing bad state laws here in Idaho, we're still okay right now, but I don't know how long that's gonna last. So that's how I kind of got involved with this.
Oh,
And
Hank, I am so sorry for everything that you've been through.
well, it happens, but you know, if I had to be truthful, if it didn't happen, I got other stuff I want to do with my life. I have kids to raise, I have a family, I have things I'd much rather do than talk about the dangers of RF radiation. But I figured that, you know, um, it's real, and it messed me up. So somebody has to stand up. And as I tried to ignore it and pretend like it was going to go away, then it just became more and more of a nuisance. And here in Idaho, down in Boise, they rolled out the 5G network, and the city actually turned over the keys of the city to Verizon Wireless, let them put towers wherever they want. And it's absolutely destructive and insane what's going on. So I thank you for everything you're doing, and everybody who's listening to this. I'm sure there's a lot of people
Yeah,
who
we've
are
got a
we're
lot of
fighting the
people with
fight, and we
us
have to do it
tonight.
together.
Yeah, who have been working on this for quite some time from their corners. So we're very grateful for everybody's efforts. Let me go ahead and resume my screen share, because we're just about to get in to the solutions. So folks, if you have any questions, feel free to jot them into the chat as we go along, and we'll save a couple minutes at the end to go ahead and address those. So legal solutions. I mentioned that the FCC has been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm, and the court was presented with 27 fat binders of evidence, and they said to the FCC, so how did you decide that you're going to stick with your public radiation exposure limits from 1996? And the FCC attorneys went, well, the FDA said it was okay. And the judges were asking, well, where's the FDA's homework? And literally none of our federal agencies have done their homework on this. So we've got a huge regulatory gap. And the court found that the FCC was arbitrary and capricious, which means they didn't do their homework, and ordered them to account for the vulnerabilities of children, the elderly, anybody with electrical sensitivities, existing health conditions, and the environment. But they didn't put a timeline to it. And so we're going on 3 years this August, and the FCC has done nothing. So again, there is no cavalry coming, but we keep making important inroads through the courts, and each one builds off the next lawsuit. So we keep going. Here in Massachusetts, our state level Association of Health Boards has attorneys on staff, and they've already put 4 pages in their legal guidelines for all of our local municipalities about cell towers. And here in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, some of you may know that Verizon turned a cell tower on top of this neighborhood, much like they did to poor Hank. and 17 children and adults got so sick they had to abandon their homes. Their Board of Health determined their homes were uninhabitable. So there's a big lawsuit going on over there. For the first time in the country, a Board of Health investigated, spoke with the scientists, spoke with the doctors, spoke with the engineers and the building biologists, and listened to industry. And they documented this emergency order to tell Verizon to come to the table, work with us, and let's figure this out. Because somebody in their community who owns commercial property already said, we don't care, move your cell tower here, we'll take your money. But Verizon would not come to the table, and instead they went to the courts and put an injunction against that cease and desist order. And so their mayor and their city council seemed to be in favor with industry, and they would not give their own Board of Health the money to take this to court to do their job to protect these families. So the mayor and the city council, in short, bullied their Board of Health along with industry to rescind that emergency order. So there is now a civil lawsuit with great thanks to Children's Health Defense. They are defending them. And we anticipate or hope that the judge will come back and say, yeah, you know, when a cell tower permit comes in, that only applies to the siting of a cell tower. So we're going to remove this injunction that the court put in for Verizon. We're going to remove that injunction and let the Board of Health do their job, because regardless of the Telecom Act, if there is a harm to the environment or the citizens, or there's a nuisance, legally, they believe it is the duty of the Board of Health to fix it. So this is groundbreaking, and I just met with Courtney Gilardi today, and it looks like they may have a court date of the 17th of June, which is a Monday. It's the day after Father's Day. And so we're talking about doing a prayer vigil in support of this court case on Sunday night of Father's Day. It might be around 8 p.m. So stay tuned if folks want to come and lend your good energy to this one. They could sure use it, and it will be groundbreaking for the rest of the country. But notably on this lawsuit, the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards sent in an amicus brief, which is a statement to the court saying that they support the Board of the Health and the citizens. So these are all really good precedents to share with your own towns. Here in Massachusetts, there was another groundbreaking court case where a little boy kept getting sick at his prestigious international school. And for the first time in U.S. courts, they did acknowledge, after testimony from Dr. Martha Herbert, Dr. David Carpenter, and others, that yes, you don't have to have heat to have harm. There are biological effects at the non-thermal level. And so Children's Health Defense has been doing a lot of really, really important lawsuits, and Hank is now being represented by Children's Health Defense under the Americans with Disabilities Act, because he should be able to ask for reasonable accommodations, either move that cell tower or point those antennas far away from residencies. So Hank, we're rooting for you and hoping you'll get there. And there are lawsuits happening all over the country. You can go out to the Children's Health Defense and see the ones they're working on. And they're now rounding up people who have been injured by smart meters and working on that as well. And then leading policy solutions. So I mentioned we've had bills in Massachusetts for about 10 years, and we've gotten them out of committee by bringing expert testimony in, but for whatever reason, they keep timing out before they take any meaningful action. But in New Hampshire, in just 7 months' time, we got a bill through their House Committee on Science, Tech, and Energy. We got it through their Senate Committee on, I think it was Health and Human Services. And then it went under Governor Sununu's pen and got enacted into law that they had 1 year to investigate the environmental and health effects of evolving 5G technology. And once they got into it, they realized it's not just 5G, it's everything that's radiating. And they were tasked with answering these very pointed questions. Why have Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, and others already put exclusions in their policies? Our towns very likely do not have coverage from damages, and neither does the industry. So this is a huge risk. Why does that legal fine print even exist that we talked about earlier tonight that says keep it away from you? And why is the FCC dropping the ball on this and allowing 100 times more radiation in our country than certain other countries do? And then why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect of this radiation coming at us 24/7 from so many multiple sources all at once? Think about a child in a classroom with 20 or 30 tablets pulsating out like a pebble in a pond all over every child, plus the wireless infrastructure, plus the smart boards, plus all the metal that amplifies the radiation. We have created a very, very harmful scenario. So this is their groundbreaking report. It's in my signature, if anybody is trying to find it again. It's also at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our state efforts page, and it's here in my slides. So Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the University of New Hampshire was selected by the government to serve on this. He had been a career engineer who made medical devices using radio frequency. And he thought, of course it's fine, of course it's safe, until he got in there and started doing the investigation. And the industry will say, oh, that's all fringe science, you know, there's nothing to it. And he went along with his colleagues on this commission, and they investigated. These are not fringe journals. These are highly regarded, very specific scientific journals. And so he does a 20-minute presentation that's great to share, and he also shares his slides. So once we got the New Hampshire Commission report, the next step was to get laws enacted that would take the 15 recommendations from the report to protect our kids, to protect ourselves, to protect our schools, to protect our environment, and get education out there for everybody, get our federal delegates back on this in DC. So new bills were introduced, and the industry got in there and killed it. But this is really critical. Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, in his testimony, he came right out and said, wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. It has lived its useful life, outlived its useful life as a main source of connectivity. So bring fiber optics to and through the premises, and we just hook up indoors with Ethernet cables and adapters. It's not rocket science to fix, but we cannot keep putting this radiation in at close range. So there are bills all over the country on this. We've got 6 here this year, and you can delve into those more. Our commission bill and our smart meter choice bill are still alive. We hope to know more in the coming month. But bills in other states have come out over the years too, so feel free to take a look. And when industry rolls into town with their permits and their applications, they say, oh, you know, if anybody says anything about it, don't listen to them. Those are just the NIMBYs. They're not my backyard people. Nobody else cares about this. Well, that's not true. If you go to Americans for Responsible Technology, you will see there are more than 150 groups already formed all over the country. And you may find one near to you. You may be, some of our guests tonight, leaders of those groups, so thank you. Or they've got a toolkit out there for how you can start your own group. And just for example, you know, people are winning. They are getting it right. Just like in Idaho, they've been able to change a lot of the zoning code in certain towns, and towns all over Massachusetts have been working on this and succeeding as well. So just some wonderful information that's available out on Idahoans for Safe Technology at this link. One example is the Ada County Commissioners. They unanimously, once they were educated by the citizens, agreed to deny a 100-foot cell tower application in Star, Idaho. There's another hearing going on, continuing this month in Bonner County, and they've got some really good work here for you on how to manage cell tower placement in your own town. So if you want to go and try and work with your town on your zoning code, they've got some excellent resources for you right there. And then here in Massachusetts, Burlington appointed a committee across all their boards from the health board to the planning to the zoning to the select board, you know, all of them got together and formed a subcommittee. And then they came up with a small cell policy that said typical things like, if you put these antennas in, they've got to be aesthetically blending in with the community, and they cannot block anything that would be not permitted under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then they said, and you can't just drop and run with this equipment. If we give you an approval on your application, you have to come back every year and recertify that this is still viable under current law. And we as a town, we don't have the money to do that independent recertification process on every single one of these antennas. So you, Verizon or whomever, you have to pay the fee to recertify everything every year. And the attorney for Verizon was there that night, and he said, well, my client does not wish to set precedent, because they know full well they look to put millions of these all over the country, and they don't want to cut them to their bottom line. But when we shared the Burlington small cell policy with other towns, they begun to adopt it and even enhance it in their own communities. So it takes citizens to inform their public servants, and good public servants will make the time to do their due diligence on this. And here's some great examples. A grandmother in Easton, Connecticut figured it out, went to her boards. There was a doctor on one of the boards. They put a 5G moratorium up and said, until this is proven scientifically safe, no thank you. And they've re-upped that moratorium a couple of times. A panel of experts were brought into Stamford, Connecticut, where it was discovered that industry had gotten in with the governor, and they cooked up a plan to start putting these 5G small cells on light posts right outside people's homes inside the neighborhoods. Once the Stamford representatives got educated on this, they said, sorry, governor, no, thank you. So it can be done. Hawaii County has a resolution that they don't want it. And this is happening all over the world, but it has to start with citizens banding together and working on this. And it's maddening because it takes a lot of time and resources that we never thought we'd have to spend in this way. But if we don't, who will? So in our schools, one of the recommendations out of New Hampshire was we've got to start migrating away from wireless in schools and use hardwired technology. And again, it's not rocket science to fix. All those wireless access points already have Ethernet ports. Just drop a cable down, put a switch at desk level, plug in all the devices and turn off the antennas and measure. Problem solved. Oh, this is great. Dr. Holly Groh organized a bunch of other physicians in Louisiana, and they put out school best practices for digital devices in conjunction with their Board of Health at the state level. The Netherlands and Finland are taking tech out of the classroom. They know it's a huge distraction, and children's outcomes are not better with technology. And the Silicon Valley executives have known this forever. The New York Times did a series of articles where they are banning screens from their children. They're sending their kids to school with no tech, and even going so far as to have their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. And thank goodness for our friends, Patty and Doug Wood at Grassroots Environmental Education. They have the Americans for Responsible Technology Project, and they have also launched Tech Safe Schools. And you can reach out to them, and they will send a kit of information to your school administrators to help you get the conversation going. So use the resources. They show us the science, the legal risk to our schools, and most importantly, how to mitigate and get on the right track for safe technology. The Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has developed kindergarten through grade 12 curriculum on prevention already. Dr. Alexia McKnight and I went into her school district in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, and we did 4 professional development lectures that day to teach the educators how to have safe technology and how to recognize when somebody around them, the children or other adults, are having the headaches and the nosebleeds and the anxiety and the depression and suicidal ideation, all these toxic symptoms that they have yet not been trained to recognize. And then here's our little course where we can literally train an entire large group in about a half an hour online. And it provides a certificate of completion for compliance training, and it kicks out a handy tip sheet with reminders on how to have safe tech. And then our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have a lot of really wonderful resources, flyers, postcards that you can print out. And then look at this. They helped Maryland become the first public health agency at the state level for children's health to recommend hardwiring in schools. And here's a fact sheet that you can credibly open the conversation with others. And then the U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools offers already low EMF best practices. This addresses any of the dirty electricity coming from the wiring in the walls, all the way up through the radio frequency radiation exposures, and says what levels we should be at. So other countries, again, when we locked our kids down with tablets for the pandemic, we just let them go on a free ride to technology and getting radiated. Other countries put out safety recommendations like Cyprus and Russia and others. So we know how to do this safely. And then, there's solutions for everybody. For those in the healthcare professions, we now have the first medical textbook on electromagnetic fields of wireless communications, biological and health effects. Thank you to Dr. Panagopoulos in Greece and all of his colleagues around the world who contributed to that textbook. And the environmental health nurses have now issued their second textbook. And in this current version, there's a chapter on EMFs. And this, the first one, the textbook here is medical school price from the publisher. The nurses have made this available in PDF form for you to download at no cost. Dr. Cindy Russell and Dr. Joel Moskowitz and others founded Physician for Safe Technology, highly credible place to send your own medical teams to. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the EMF Medical Conference is now available at no cost. And I worked with Libby Kelly and I created this document where they have hooked up the direct links to every lecture in YouTube and in Vimeo. So if you click on this link, you'll get this document and you can just start slotting these lectures in on your calendar to do 1 or 2 a day. And before you know it, you will be professionally trained. Again, excellent resources for all of our professions. I'll let you dive into that on your own time. And at home and at work. So some people are do-it-yourselfers and easy peasy for them to just go hook wires up to your routers and then hook up the devices and then turn off the antennas and measure. Not rocket science. For some people, that terrifies them. So please know, in Hank's situation, he had lived in a moldy house, and that mold is very often a trigger for people to become electrically sensitive. So please know there are highly trained consultants who are called building biologists, and they can be hired to come into your home or do remote consultations and send you the kit that you would need to take measurements of the air quality, the water quality, and what's happening with the electromagnetic field. So no, there's a solution for everything. And this is fun. When we start seeing things come pretty mainstream in PBS, Camilla Reese and Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe and others worked with Bert Wolf, who has a travel show on PBS, Public Broadcasting Station, and they did 2 half-hour episodes on this. So those are very cool to share. And then there's this award-winning film called Generation Zapped, and it came out in 2018. It was selected as part of the United Nations Association Film Festival. It won Best Documentary at the Women's Independent Film Festival and the Washington, D.C. Independent Film Festival, and has picked up all sorts of other accolades. This is a really great way to start the conversation. I think it just got censored here in the US on Amazon Prime, but it's still available in other countries on Amazon Prime. But fortunately, most of our library streaming services like Canopy and Hoopla also offer Generation Zapped. So you could just watch it with a dozen of your closest friends and family members, get the parents of the kids that your kids or grandkids hang out with, and just start the conversation in a highly credible way. I was honored that my work with our schools is featured for a couple of seconds in here, with our little sign, our best practices for mobile devices. So use the resources that are available. Do not go this alone to the authorities. You will be swept under the rug very quickly and nothing will happen. So get others around you educated first, and then as a group, keep showing up, because that is how change happens. And then our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology, they've got a whole toolkit for you to either start a group or join a group, letters to the editor, sample zoning code, sample legislation you can get introduced. So people have been working so hard on your behalf, that please take advantage of what they've come up with. And then at the municipal level, the goal is to get to as low as reasonably achievable with these man-made frequencies. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention already has this ALARA principle for ionizing radiation, and we've been trying to get them for years to do it for non-ionizing radiation, but we talked about the conflicts of interest with industry and our federal agencies, but this should be our goal. So when our towns investigate, there are wonderful resources for municipal leaders. I have a page in my own research repository that I called Understanding EMFs, because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were. So as a technical writer, I just started gathering information and sorting it. And so we've got a page here to put ourselves in the shoes of our municipal leaders. What is their system? What hurdles do they have to get over before they can affect meaningful change? So lots of good resources there. And it's key to differentiate between the industry's priorities and the public's priorities. There is a wonderful document that's free and online that you can download called Reinventing Wires, the Future of Landlines and Networks. Bringing more wireless is not sustainable. We need to be bringing fiber optic or high-speed copper or cable right to the buildings. And all the fiber is already laid throughout the country. We just need to connect it up to the premises. So that is all very well documented here in Reinventing Wires. And again, measure against real biological limits, not the FCC's harmful limits. And those numbers are given here. Okay, so what do? For next steps, we have to admit we have a problem. There is no safe level of man-made radiation of this nature in the scientific literature. So we've got to get the reductions going. Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who headed up the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, says, yeah, we have captured agencies, but there are still some good people up there. But they're going to need to be pushed forward by voices coming up from the local and state level. So we've got our work cut out for us, but so many great initiatives that you can emulate. And then let's get the public educated, because that's really where the power lies. And we will be doing these 2 free public education webinars for the foreseeable future. The next one with Hank's colleague, David DeHaas, is going to be Thursday, June 27th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 1 p.m. Mountain Time. But we will do this every month to keep the conversation flowing, so you always have a highly credible place to come back and keep learning. Some people come, go home and fix a little something, come back again, learn a little more, go fix a little more. So come back as often as you want. We love to see you, and then bring others with you who you think would be interested in safe technology. I can also be brought in, as can other experts, to do regional or town public education forums. Now that we all do Zoom, that's easy enough. I love to present in person. It's just so much more powerful when we're in each other's heart spaces. So good examples here if you want to make the proposition to your town, and start where you are. What do you do with your time? Are you a professional? Most professionals have professional organizations that are always looking for public speakers. That's my happy place. I love getting out and educating. So please don't hesitate. If there's anything I can do to help you learn and help your community learn, I'd love to help. So our towns need to be encouraged. Now that technology is here to stay, we need to have tech safety committees. And we need to make it crystal clear that we should never allow these smart meters into our community if they're radiating. And at a minimum, we should be getting an opt-out at no fee, because otherwise it's extortion to start charging people to keep a toxin off of their home. And then start making plans to transition to hardwired tech in all of our public spaces, and get our local zoning bylaws up to snuff. You know, the industry comes and says, oh, your hands are tied, it's all preempted, there's nothing you can do. Well, as the attorneys will tell us, you may have one finger tied, but there's 9 or 10 or 20 other things you can put in your local zoning code to make it difficult for industry to just roll into town and put these toxic infrastructures where they don't belong. So again, we have this toolkit, there are checklists and samples. And then most of our town attorneys are, you know, good people, but they are no match for the wireless industry, and very few specialize in telecom law. So our town should not be shy about hiring an expert. Andrew Campanelli is one of the country's leading experts in this. He used to work for industry. He knows their playbook inside and out. And then he discovered the harm and he switched teams. So he now represents citizens and municipalities. So our towns really need to be encouraged. I think right now his fee to look at your zoning code, look at your state code, he knows the federal code, and help you to redraft your local zoning. I think his fee is only like $8,500. So it's not going to break the bank for most of our towns. For today, what might you do to start reducing your exposures? Start noticing. What is radiating around you? What are your habits around technology? And then start with baby steps. We know, as they said at the medical conferences, we know this is like drinking water out of a fire hose when you first learn about this. But now that you know, you're halfway there. Now you can start taking baby steps. Maybe tonight you create a sleep sanctuary. Maybe you put your cell phone in airplane mode. You can still use the alarm, the clock, anything you've downloaded on there, your camera, all there to enjoy without even needing radiating signals going back and forth. So start with baby steps, create that sleep sanctuary, and then make your way to Ethernet cables and adapters and a measuring device. And when you're on the go, think about keeping it in airplane mode. You can set alarms on your clock in airplane mode, and every half hour or hour, pick it up, set it off your body, turn it on, upload, download, and then go back into airplane mode and pick it up and respond to your texts and your emails. If you put it in airplane mode, your phone calls will go into voicemail, and just pretend you're in the shower. People don't get to have access to you 24/7, right? It's kind of nice. You get your life back when you take charge of your technology. And then here's a good sampling of these wonderful resources at the Environmental Health Trust. Look at all these really nice flyers that you can print out, one pagers, 2 pagers, and use to your benefit when you open these conversations. So thank you, everybody. We're so grateful you gave us your time tonight. This is how you can contact Idahoans for Safe Technology at this link, or you can email them directly here. Same thing with Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and you can contact me directly here. So go pound around, see what resonates with you. Again, we'll be sending our slides out to you tomorrow and the video recording from today. So I'll stop the screen share and I'll ask Hank if we see anything in the chat that we can address. Oh, you're muted, huh?
Yeah, mic back on. So I'm looking up, there was a question about mold toxicity and if there's been any kind of reports or studies on the correlation with mold toxicity and RF radiation. So I'm looking it up. I know Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, he has done a lot of research on that. And he actually, it was through YouTube that I found the study that he did someplace in Europe where they put mold samples underneath a microscope, and then they measured the amount of mycotoxins coming off of it when it was under a Faraday cage, and then they removed the Faraday cage when it was next to a cell phone. And I was like, I don't know, it was exponential. I think it was 9x of what the amount of toxic mycotoxins that came off of the mold study. And there's been a lot of work that Richie Shoemaker, and then also I put a link to a really good book. It's called Toxic, and that was written by Neil Nathaniel. And I'm about halfway through that book, and it's probably the best information that I've found to date from an alternative doctor, if you would, that deals with people with chronic illness. And he's finding a lot of links with mold toxins. Highly recommend
Wow.
the book. It's in the chat, the link to it.
Great resources, Hank. Thank you so much.
Yep.
And I also want to share on that note that Dr. Lisa Nagy, it's spelled Nagy, but it's pronounced Nagy. She was the co-chair of the first EMF medical conference here in the US back in 2019. She has an environmental health practice out on Martha's Vineyard. And being on an island, there's a lot of moisture, and she is seeing so many children and adults getting sick. And then we know that this radio frequency causes cells to multiply more rapidly, even the cells that we don't want to multiply rapidly. So there are physicians out there. If you go to the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, these are the physicians who get the conundrum cases that regular doctors have yet to be trained on. So there is help out there, and there are doctors who understand it. Clearly not enough are trained today, but now you can point your own medical teams to go get that training. So feel free to look through the EMF medical conference as well, and I think you will find some conversation around this too. All right, other questions?
That's all I'm seeing right now in the chat. There was a question on who was it? Helma was talking about hardwiring her house, and she's having a hard time finding an electrician to put Cat5 cabling in. And she was kind of wondering if she had to do all of her outlets or just specific outlets. I don't know if we have time. I could kind of give her a quick
Yeah,
rundown.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Perfect. So really, when you're hardwiring a house, you only need to put Cat5 cabling from your router or your modem, where your modem comes into the house, and then you run it to places like your computer or your smart TVs. And like I just went down and we upgraded our flat screen TVs, because the new ones now have Cat5 plugins, so you can hardwire everything, turn off the Wi-Fi on the TVs, turn off the Wi-Fi on your modem, and then it runs super fast, way faster than the Wi-Fi ever would, and it doesn't cause harm to you. So it's pretty easy. And so like for our house, we have we have 3 TVs. My wife has her computer, he has 2 computers, and I have my computer, my kids' computers. So we've run it to about a dozen different places so that we can plug in our computers. It works great, and really is inexpensive to have an electrician come out. It usually takes about 4 or 5 hours for them to come out, and then you're talking probably maybe $150 in parts and wire. So it's really affordable to do. And pretty much every electrician, you tell them you want to hardwire your house with Cat5 cabling, so you could turn off your Wi-Fi, and they will understand exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, somebody in the chat said, is Cat5 the same as Ethernet cables? And it is.
Yes.
And now we're up to Cat6, Cat7. Some of the ones we bought recently are not round like this, but they're flat, which is nice because you can tape them down easily if they're running across the room or something. So take a peek around and decide what you want. If you're going to buy new Ethernet cables, you might want to look for something that says shielded. There's another form of man-made energy that comes off of wiring. And in commercial builds, the code says you have to have shielded cables. All that means is that inside the plastic, there's a little foil liner around the wires in here, and it keeps that electric and magnetic field from bleeding out into your living space. So if you're going to buy, protect yourself even that much further and get shielded cabling if you can.
Great advice.
Yeah. So Sheila, I just saw something pop up asking how to hardwire a cell phone. So I don't think you can hardwire the cell phone call function. That still has to go through a cell tower. But everything else you do on your cell phone, anything on the internet, you can do just by getting the Ethernet cable to your router and then getting one of these little dongles for whatever your model phone is. This is the Lightning to Ethernet adapter for the iPhone. It costs maybe $20, $30. So you plug that in and then you have to go into the settings and turn off all the antennas. And when I did this for my daughter when she was in high school, she was 15 at the time. And I said, okay, look, we're going to hardwire your phone. And, every 15-year-old wants to be exactly like their friends. That's just where their metamorphosis is at this stage, right? So she's rolling her eyeballs at me. I said, no, really, let's try. I said, okay, here's how we plug it in. And then we went in and we turned off the antennas. I said, now do something. And she goes, oh my gosh, Mom, it's so much faster. And I said, yeah. And in my mom brain, I'm going, yeah, and you're a lot safer. And then she goes, so if I'm running it all through the wires, does that mean it's not eating into my data plan? I said, that's right, because she had a monthly allotment. If she went over it, we made her pay out of pocket. So that's how I got my teenager to buy into using a wired connection when she's at home, because it saved her money.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I have three daughters. They're all in high school, a freshman, a junior, and a senior. And what's actually kind of amazing is in their classes now, they teach these kids all about, drug addiction, alcoholism, and they're so well trained on different chemicals that they could possibly enter their body. And when I explain the harm from wireless radiation, and they get it, they were able to kind of, get their hands around it, and then trying to just make that bridge to make it as convenient as possible. And like you're saying, once I put the hardwired Ethernet in the wall in their bedrooms, gave them a long cable, so they have I think I gave them a 12-foot, Cat 5, like that blue cable you have, and so they can sit on their bed, they can have their phone plugged in, and they can watch, YouTube videos if they want, or they can text or chat their friends, and it's fine. They have the privacy to do it what they want, but they're not putting that radiation. And
Yeah.
like you've shown, if you use the safe and sound meter and you show them the radiation, put the phone up to it, and then stream a movie, and they could see how much radiation comes off those phones, they get it really quick.
They
And
do. In fact, I met with my federal congressman, Jim McGovern, last Friday with some other citizens working on some federal bills that Odette Wilkins and Charles are working on these days. And I left him with one of my meters, and I just went
yeah,
back today and got it. And I was working with one of his aides, and he said, yeah, when you left that here, I went around, all of our interns just started working for the semester. He said, we were all testing our phones and stuff. So seeing is believing. Having a meter in hand is one of the most important things you can do. And I saw there was another question in the chat about electric vehicles and stuff. Again, you have to have a meter to be able to measure. My husband was a car guy, and he was really excited when the Rivian was coming to market. That was the first electric truck. And so he got on a wait list for it. And this was then the pandemic hit, and then supply chain issues happened. And they wanted to keep that customer base that was interested. So they got one off the assembly line and drove it to everybody's house who was signing up for one. And I was in here working, giving a talk one day, and he came and he says, where's your meter? And so he runs back out into the garage with the meter. And I get done with my call and I go out and I said, so what'd you find? And the guy had taken off with the truck and he said, oh, it wasn't good, right? I said, well, I'm never getting in that thing with you. And so when the truck was delivered, sure enough, I went and measured, and it wasn't even turned on. And it was over 40,000 microwatts per square meter
oh
walking
gosh,
around me, because it's got all these sensors on it now, right? All these bells and whistles. So Steve is the financial planner, so his world makes sense in terms of dollars and cents. And these were in such high demand that he sold it and made $10,000 on the
oh,
deal.
oh wow, that's
Yeah,
great.
but it is hard. It's hard on our spouses and our family members when we learn this stuff, because they've been bought into this convenience. So be
Yeah,
gentle with yourselves, be gentle with everybody else around you, but be determined and don't stop until you get it done. It's too important. Those cumulative effects will take us down. So
yeah. And it makes a big difference. I know personally from my health journey to recovery, every little piece. And what I had to do is think of small bites, like how do you eat an elephant, right? And it's one
Mhm.
bite at a time. So I personally kind of go, okay, let's make a sleep sanctuary. Let's make it so that I took the meter and I went into my bed and I made sure with the meter that my bedroom where I slept at night was safe. And then you start from that, you get yourself a little place, you go, okay, here's my home base. And then you go, okay, what's the next best place? And so I wanted to sit on the couch so I could hang out with my family and maybe watch TV in the evening. And then you take that on as your next science project and you
Yeah,
kind of eat
and
that little
Hank, if
bite.
I could just interject,
Yeah.
my TV has the Ethernet port on it, but there was nothing in the settings I could do to disable the wireless. I tried talking to the manufacturers, I tried getting an engineer. I had to pick up my TV, put it in my car and take it down to the local tech guy. And I paid him $80 and he opened it up and he pulled the antenna out for me and he gave it to
Yeah.
me.
So
It's just a
um,
little board. That's
I
all it
went
is.
down to Costco literally like 3 months ago, and we upgraded all of our TVs, and they're all running the Google Play system.
Mm,
And I was really worried about the same thing you're talking about because 2 years ago, you're absolutely right. You couldn't even find a phone or a TV set that had a Cat 5 plug-in, like an Ethernet plug-in
yeah.
to it. They all were 100% Wi-Fi for a smart TV. And then just recently, literally like in the last 6 months when I went down, they changed them and the prices dropped. A new flat screen TV is like $300 at Costco and you can plug them
Nice.
in. And again, the only way you can tell is you have to have your meter. So you turn the TV on and it tells you, oh, it's using the Ethernet. And I go in and disable all the Wi-Fi and then double check it. And sure enough, it shut it all off. So I was pleasantly surprised that the industry selling TVs is catching on.
Yeah,
Uh,
and they should do that for all of our electronics, even in the cars. If we
yeah,
had an on-off switch for the Bluetooth, for the Wi-Fi, for the camera, for the wheel
yeah,
well sensors, everything. And as somebody noted, it's not just the electric vehicles. I drive a 2002 Lexus that I bought used with low mileage because I've never felt good under fluorescent light. So I know my body's been giving me biofeedback forever. And so I'm very careful. So new, used, but you got to measure, otherwise you don't know what you're up against.
yeah. We
Yeah.
just bought a washer and dryer. It was an LG washer and dryer from Costco. Sure enough, it was a smart washer and dryer.
Mhm.
Just like you said, there was no
Yeah.
option to turn it off. So I actually had to pull the whole thing apart and get in there, and they had it. So when you pull the front off, you can disconnect the wire.
Yeah.
But you had to go to YouTube and figure it out how to turn off the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that
But
was exactly like the stove we got. We had our old stove for 26 years, and I was to the point where I was fanning the oven door to get the pilot light to light.
uh-huh.
So my husband finally said, "We're getting a new stove." So he bought this floor model at a really good price and brings it home, and I see that it's got smart technology, and I went, uh-oh. So a girlfriend of mine bought a new stove, and we could go right into her settings and just disable the Wi-Fi and measure
Yeah,
it. We got it all. I looked in the settings, couldn't find it. I pulled out the manual and it had the RF exposure warning in there, and it
yeah,
said, stay 20 centimeters away from this radiation. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Stand in the middle of my kitchen?
yeah,
Um, I don't want to be the thing cooking in there. So I called for tech support. They sent a guy out and I showed him my meter, and my goal was to get back down to under 10 microwatts per square meter. And I said, do you want me to? I said, well, you can't really see it now because your cell phone is emitting. And he
uh-huh,
goes, well, fine, I'll go wait out in my truck. So he stormed out of my house and went and sat in his truck and waited for the engineers to tell him what to do because he had never had a service call like
yeah,
this. And then he comes back in, and like you said, he just pulled off the back panel, and behind the digital display is the motherboard. And right next to the motherboard was this little tiny board that he just unplugged.
yep. And
It was
and
at a
I
1,090,000 in my kitchen. And then
really
it went down to
goes
nothing.
down to nothing. And I find YouTube, I can't believe how much people YouTube. And I type in the model number of whatever my product is and say disable Wi-Fi. Someone's done a video on it and they give you little
Awesome.
pictures. It's amazing what we have at our fingertips
Mhm.
after you get your computer hardwired.
Right, right.
Yeah, don't be on
Yeah,
your phone or going over Wi-Fi on your computer. But
I know.
it's all one step
I've
at a
got my
time.
corded mouse, my corded keyboard, all of it. It all adds up. So,
Oh,
well,
that's
listen,
one
if
other
there are no
thing.
more, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, same thing, the wired mouse. So I
Mhm.
remember this was probably 15 years ago. And when they first came out with the wireless mouse with the little red light that came out, the laser, and I thought I was getting carpal tunnel. I would sit down at the computer and I grab onto that mouse and my whole forearm would start tensing up. And I go, what is going on? And I tried all these different mice. They were all wireless mouse. Finally, I went on to eBay and found an old Dell, the old
Oh,
roller
yeah.
ball mice that plugs
Oh,
in
yeah.
with a USB. And I bought this thing for like $15, and I still have to go in there and take my pencil eraser every couple months and get the lint out of it, and the carpal tunnel went away. And it was
Isn't it
just like that,
amazing?
to get rid of that
Yeah,
wireless.
yeah, it reminds me of Deb Hodgson up in New Hampshire. She was the catalyst, the citizen who got so sick from the wireless in her house. She was having heart problems. She was having memory problems, the skin problems. She was just crashing. And she got rid of the wireless in her house. And the thing that helped her family see that mom's not actually crazy is they had given her a plant that sat in the kitchen doing nothing for a long time. She gets rid of the wireless, that plant shot up like 15 inches in just a couple of months. So
Really?
all of her symptoms resolved when she cleaned up her environment. So it can be, it can look to be miraculous. And
Yeah,
we see it time and again. The building biologists see these, what some would call a miracle, but it's really just getting rid of your environmental toxins. So.
yeah.
All right, folks. Well, we are up at the top of the hour. We are so very grateful that you joined us. We'll send out the video, we'll send out my slides, and come back anytime. We try to keep at least 2 events for you on the calendar every month. I will say that we're doing a World EHS event this month on the 24th, which is a Monday night. And it will be at 7 p.m. And we have a lot of people coming in to speak for 2 minutes to share their experience and give us inspiration for the inroads that they're making. So thank you,
Cece,
everybody.
once again, thank you so much, and God
You
bless you for everything
betcha.
you do and educating everyone. You're awesome. We love you so
Well,
much.
right back at you, Hank. It takes so much courage to do what you've done and to do the fight that you're doing out there in Idaho for everybody in our world. So we're following your work. And thank you, everybody. Have a tech safe night, and we'll be back in touch soon.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.